Welcome, everyone. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and I'm so glad that you're here. If you've joined past monthly webinars, you know that our speaker chooses the song to welcome you, and I really appreciate the lyrics in Eye of the Tiger about change happening so fast and needing to rise up to challenges. Stories Change Power supports people who want to make a difference in their neighborhoods, communities, and country overcome the challenges of advocacy. Before we turn to today's discussion, I'm delighted to share that we just opened registration for several programs this spring and summer, including Storytelling 101, where we'll cover the basics of storytelling for positive change, ethical storytelling, where we'll equip you to do right by the people who are involved in any story at every stage of storytelling, and our online summer learning community, which is an amazing way to learn to be an effective, empathetic, and trusted advocate alongside people around the country. So check out our programming page for all of our offerings, and be sure you're following us on LinkedIn for our pro-democracy resources and inspiration. Before we turn to today's topic, I want to thank the National Center for Weight and Wellness for recognizing the importance of civic health and supporting and sponsoring today's talk. If you'd like to help keep this series free for everyone, we'll share a link at the end of the program and would love to hear from you. The chat is open throughout the webinar for constructive conversation among our human friends only. Your AI is welcome to watch the recording, and we'll share that early next week. Anytime you've got questions, and I imagine there will be a lot, we're going to cover some really exciting topics and important topics today. Use the Q&A, you'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And if we can't reach your question today, stay tuned in an upcoming newsletter or LinkedIn. We'll get in touch with you with an answer. Our captions are enabled. Please use those if they're helpful for you. And as a reminder, this is a webinar, so you are off camera, off mic. Do what you need to do to be fully present and take good care of yourself as we address big topics today. We'll be talking about recent reforms and congressional modernization and how that can transform civic engagement. We will cover everything from AI to the right to petition. And I could spend the entire hour telling you about all the incredible work that Lorelei Kelly has done. Instead, I'll sum it up by saying that she has 25 years of experience in supporting democracy in the United States and around the world. And I encourage you to read more at the link that we'll share in the chat, both now and in the description of the recording. So Lorelei, welcome. Thank you for making time to be with us today. Before we dive in, we'll have a poll pop up that should pop up in just a moment. We've got 2 questions for you today. It's always helpful for us to know who has joined us and how long have you worked in advocacy. You'll see that in the first question. There's an I'm new here. If you've been here less than 2 years in the advocacy field, maybe a good while, 3 to 7 years, a good long while, 7 to 10 years, and maybe you're a pro with more than a decade of experience. Or maybe you're not in the field of advocacy, and that's a-okay. Our webinars are always welcome to everyone, and so that last option is there for you. If you are not in advocacy work, just mark that there. Our second question today is an interesting one. We want to know what you think, and again, this is a pop quiz. There's a right answer, but there's no penalty for being wrong. We want to hear your best guess. Our question is, when did all congressional district offices get access to secure Wi-Fi? And your options are 1993, 2003, 2013, and 2023. I've seen some good responses come in. We'll keep that open for a few more seconds. If you've not been able to answer, or if you're not able to get to the poll as a poll, feel free to pop your answer into the chat. We'll give people just a few more moments. Let's close that in maybe 3, 2. Oh, I'm seeing more responses come in. And we'll go ahead and close in 3, 2, and 1. And you will see those results. It looks like we've got a good portion of folks who are new to advocacy. Welcome. Also a good few who are pros. Welcome as well. And lots of folks in the middle. On our second question, it looks like there's a couple votes for 2003 being the year that congressional district offices got access to secure Wi-Fi, about 20 years ago, one would hope. A few for 2013, and more than half on 2023. So with that, Lorelei, I will turn over to you to share what the right answer is and much more about Congress and modernization and how we can be helpful as advocates. So as you are ready, we'll turn on your video and take you off mute and move into our presentation.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Hi,
Welcome.
everyone. I'm glad to know that you all are probably as big of a doom scroller as I am, and you chose 2023 because you're right. Congress, the whole of Congress and district offices just got secure Wi-Fi from their workplace in 2023. And to add to that, I would just note that only a few months ago did some of the most important expert advisory office to Congress get off the free version of Zoom. Some of you, if you followed Congress, might know that it is working right now at sort of 1980 levels of staffing. Its committee process is stopped working in a lot of ways. It's not doing its deliberative process in comparison to decades past. And what we've been seeing for the last few years, right, is that everything gets waited until the end, and the budget becomes sort of a hostage process. And so one of the things that I'm going to talk about today, and we can engage in the discussion afterward, is how do we both sort of reform and update this vital institution, the first, the heartbeat of the first branch of government, Article 1 in the Constitution. How do we use the underused excess capacity of democracy to start fighting back against democratic backsliding, but also this authoritarian regime? And I mean, we are in a constitutional crisis right now. I'm kind of laughing because I just got a text before I started, and I don't know who it's from yet, but the text is, "Where the hell is Congress?" So it could be any number of things they're asking about, but I hope that we can engage in this today, because my goal with this discussion is to figure out how we start to illuminate a pathway forward out of this crisis that we're in, responding to what's happening with protest and things like town halls and traditional functions of Congress, I think, are really important. But I think it's also, we need our eyes on the prize. We need a horizon line of our shared future as a nation. And so what I'd like to talk about is how we move from resistance to resilience. And I think that we can do that through the reforms of modernization that have happened over the last 6 years in Congress. It's a good news story that very few people know about. And so I'm going to start now. Do you have the slides up? We can start with that, or if I can see the slides. Oh, there we go. So I'll just say yes, or to switch. So what I'm going to talk about is this overlap place in the middle of the Venn diagram. Right now, we might be in a crisis. It's very scary. It's awful, the headlines. It's a lot of illegal activities and dubious actions, as well as they're constitutional. Like, they're moving fast and breaking things on purpose. But one of the things that we can focus on while we're, hiring lawyers and hoping that the courts protect us is the fact that the first branch of government is still in the 19th century and has been for a long time. We haven't updated it. We have not modernized our democratic practices like a lot of other healthy democracies have. That's why we're not a healthy, robust democracy. Now, our institutions have been brittle for a long time, and I would argue that they're becoming fragile now. But at the same time, while this is happening, we have to recognize that there's a new digital layer that's been built in government. Those of you maybe who have followed this DOGE, the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, took over something called the U.S. Digital Service, which was doing tremendous work inside government to update, modernize, help democracy deliver, try to create new processes, websites, efficiency, effective response, that kind of thing. The tragedy in the executive branch is that was wiped out. The same thing at 18F, which was a consultation service for all the federal agencies that came about after the healthcare debacle during the Obama administration. They brought in a lot of talent, and those people have created a tremendous new potential for updating a modernized democracy. The same thing happened with Congress about 12 years later. Congress created a modernization committee. So there's a new digital layer in US government. Uh, the executive branch has been about 10 years ahead of the first branch. The Supreme Court has not even started on any of this yet. But what I'm going to talk about is this new digital layer. And then also that there's a recognition in the tech industry and also just in movements that are trying to figure out what is the public good option, like public AI, or how do we, if we're in this new world full of technology, how do we make sure that there's a pro-public capacity there, that content moderation is important, that protecting children is important. That has been something that has still been bipartisan over the last few years. And I'm thinking that the really hopeful place is to all of us to find each other and start building on that. And what I'm going to talk about today is what we've done in Congress on this. So go ahead and so this Article 1 in the Constitution, Congress in the first branch, Congress is the first among equals. It's Article 1 because it's the most important. Civic voice, representative government. It's an indirect system, right? It's a pretty conservative system when you think about it. But it is tremendously powerful. It's the most powerful representative assembly in the world. Article 1 gives Congress the power to make laws, to declare war, to approve treaties. It writes all the checks. Like Congress has all the money. And when people often, when I go out and say that I'm working to help update and modernize Congress, people are mad and they want to rant about it and they want to ignore it or just say like burn it all down. And I would just point out that it has all the money and it has control of all the guns. And so when something is that important, you can't just ignore it. It's a really hard institution to reform. I mean, I can't imagine anything more complex. One of the reasons that it's been hard to update and modernize its technology is that if a tech company builds something for Congress, it can only sell one of them. It's a unique institution. It's not a parliament. It's not a top-down system that pays attention to what the executive branch wants. It's a constant negotiation. They're frenemies, if anything. And I think what we're seeing now is Congress has been a real casualty of the last month and a half. But it's not new, and it's not an accident that Congress is hollowed out and so powerless. It's really an outcome. It's an outcome of an attack on all federal level government. And Congress has started certainly right after I came to DC, right after the contract with America and Newt Gingrich had wiped out a lot of the capacity of Congress. And I'll talk more about that. But so the additional powers implied in all of these other powers is the power of oversight. And oversight is what Congress is supposed to do in its regular process, where it deliberates, it makes laws, it evaluates, it looks at outcomes of how a law that was made needs to be updated. This whole process, which is called authorizing and appropriating. So authorizing is the deliberative process. Some committees just do that. And appropriating is where the money gets assigned to what has been authorized. And since I've been on the Hill working in and out since the late 90s, the authorization process has really fallen by the wayside. And so just remember that they've just crammed everything into the committees who only really know how to do the money part. And so we have a real open moment for refiguring out new practices of deliberation, new practices of community-informed decision-making, making more robust the discussion of policy, which is right the content moderation of the most important issues of the day and the most powerful legislature in the world. Just think about that. It has not been able to update and modernize its deliberative process or its ability to conduct oversight because Congress really doesn't have a way to monitor and evaluate. It just doesn't. That is something we can also build. So go ahead. So oversight is the implied other power here. So Congress's tech and data capacity is so behind because of political power consolidation. This happened after 1995. The skewed incentives are just that today in today's media environment, members get elected and they're more incentivized to perform than to govern. This is partly because of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, which in, when was it, 2010? Unleashed, it basically said money is voice and that unlimited money is unlimited freedom of speech. And that you can release all kinds of anonymous money into the metabolic system of democracy, right? It wasn't just issue capture. Now we're talking about systems capture by money. And in my life since 2010, I've really seen that happen in Congress, where at every level, any opportunity for members to represent their constituents is captured. It's either captured by very expensive lobbyists downtown, or the noise that is, the incentive system is to get likes or tweets or get on Fox or MSNBC. Again, like those distractions, we're seeing a lot of it happen right now, sort of flooding the zone. But that whole distraction of noise instead of governing, or the capture, which makes it so it doesn't even worth it anymore to represent your constituents, those are incentive problems that we need to realign. And they've been skewed for a long time, but they became really just existential threats after Citizens United and the Supreme Court allowed anonymous money into the bloodstream of our democracy across the board. So the self-inflicted harms is just that Congress has seen this happen to itself. Like Project 2025, I'll just say, is not new. The first year I moved to DC, somebody handed me the Heritage Foundation plan for the year, and it had all of this in their sort of more immature levels. All of these sort of the depredations and the destruction of our, representative system, and this longing for kind of an imperial government, executive authority. It was all there. And the right wing philanthropy has funded basically an adjacent state for the right wing, and you're seeing it right now because they don't need the government, because they've migrated a lot of very similar, knowledge and policymaking powers, and also the money into these think tanks and apparatus, and the ones at the state level as well. Like I came to work in DC to do damage control against Gingrich on nuclear weapons issues, so I was a nuclear weapons person in Congress when I came to DC, and I worked with Senator Lugar from Indiana and a group of House Democrats and Republicans. These were the issues that were sort of transcendent, right? They were above politics. A lot of the presence of those issues got wiped out after 1995. My specific gig when I came to DC in 1998 was to try to replace the functions of the Arms Control and Foreign Policy Caucus, which worked across the Hill with staff to make sure that these global public interests had a voice inside Congress. So those are the issues that, and you can see how little situational awareness Congress seems to have about the world. And one of the reasons is because it really lobotomized its situational awareness in the 90s. Other issues were like anything related to climate change, hunger, refugees, things that didn't have a direct domestic constituency. So what Gingrich did, which was an evil genius move, was he wiped out the public serving infrastructure for knowledge sharing and privatized it into lobbying or to his ideological allies in think tanks. And, Heritage has always been the mothership. And if you've been on Capitol Hill, they bought up the property on Mass Avenue across from the Senate, and they've got a house side annex. And so this was also happening in real time for the last 25 years. It's not been hidden at all. So, Congress still uses conference phones. A lot of its memory, its documentation is in shoeboxes in the basement of the Rayburn building. It uses Rolodexes and file cabinets. And here, this thing on the left, the hopper was something on the floor of the House until recently that members just threw their bills in there to be managed and put out as bills. And it could have been written on a menu, it could have been on a napkin, it could have been on a spiral notebook. But until very recently, and in fact, the pandemic, members couldn't even submit legislation or co-sponsors online. So that's something the pandemic did. And I just think it's a shocking statistic that, Americans spent 5 times more on Hamilton the musical tickets than on all the committees of Congress, the most powerful and consequential legislature in the world. So that's how far behind we have been. Go ahead. So the data revolution, like data, the outside world looks like a sort of scary tsunami of information for poor Congress. It's a poor, it's such a jalopy on its tech and communications system. It's really like, bungee cords and duct tapes until recently. It was just doing the best it could with its equipment that it had, including those conference phones and interns with clipboards running around getting signatures. And the other thing, right, is that we've been a lot of news lately about this is the age of members is like 68 and in the 70s for the Senate. Like these aren't people who naturally think about modern technology as a useful part of life, right? Like I can tell stories about members deleting their inboxes and only wanting to play solitaire, like just crazy. So one of the things that we have to look forward to as members get younger, just because time goes by, they become brand ambassadors for the modern world. They don't have to be, it's not special anymore. Like this conversation will seem strange to them. Like, but of course we should have all the modern things that any modern business or important organization should have. And that's actually starting to happen now as members retire and as younger members get into more prominence. So the data revolution has just looked like a sinister tsunami overtaking the poor capital, and it's barely been prepared to handle it, although it's turning itself around now. Go ahead. So this is the most scary org chart you can imagine. Like this is just a mashup of all of the committees and authorities inside Congress that have responsibility for technology and communications. I just put this up here because this is how crazy and complicated it is to try to sort it out and get permissions and try new things and create or rebuild a common knowledge sharing system of Congress. And I'd add to this is that every member owns all their own data. They're like their own little universe. They're little 800,000 people in a district. Members have until recently had all their, they, bought their own equipment, but they all own their own data. And so to do anything that, that creates an institutional memory that's collective, you have to get all the members to sign on to it. And one of the things we're trying to do with the committee is to create incentives for sharing like agnostic public serving knowledge, like templates for the Veterans Administration or different kinds of things that farmers have been needing, or newsletters that share things that are good for the whole country, that don't compromise people's political information or their constituents or their politics. Like how do you separate the sort of campaign stuff from the governing stuff, I think is one of the critical questions that we all face right now, because right now governing looks like campaigning, and it's for reasons that I mentioned previously about the incentive systems. Go ahead. So the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress ran from 2019 to 2022 with 6 Democrats, 6 Republicans. It ran through the pandemic and in fact got Congress online. I was part of a cohort called the Fixed Congress Cohort. It was a civil society group. I was in at Georgetown leading the Modernizing Congress portfolio on the Georgetown research faculty. My colleagues were left to right coalition. We had all worked on the Hill. And so we probably had over 350 years of Hill experience among us 25, 30 people, continually working together, helping this institution heave ho into the future, doing the research, supporting the staff, doing outreach, testifying in front of committees, pulling, you saw that org chart, pulling it together. So we were able to get 202 recommendations passed. I can provide the final document, but if you just put final report, Select Committee on Modernization, there's some beautiful documentation up about it. And about 60% of them have been passed or closed or in process. The most difficult ones, sort of the 40% that aren't, I think are the hardest ones. And they have a lot to do with new methods of civic engagement. And that's what we'll talk about more. So if you want to look at this, I can get it for you, but you can also find it just by Googling. The name of the member who ran it was a gentleman named Representative Derek Kilmer, Washington State. It has been rolled into a subcommittee in the House now. It's a part of the Committee on House Administration, and the member who's leading it now is a member, Stephanie Bice from Oklahoma City. And so it's still going. It's just not a special select committee anymore. And that subcommittee is trying to implement the recommendations. I think it's probably a really hard row to hoe right now with Congress being so inert and not knowing how to respond. Go ahead. So existing data, I mean, like part of the thing I showed you that slide, a lot of Congress's data is inaccessible. It's really hard to find, even if you go on congress.gov, it's hard. It's one of the largest publishing entities in the world. Like Congress is massive. It just churns out data all the time. And this is happening at the institutional level. It's happening in its agencies. It's happening in the House and in the Senate, and in its committees. Um, and so a lot of it is still, again, in shoeboxes and Rolodexes, and members own their own. But my contention has always been, if we could just do it 30% better, we would have a rich, wonderful training data. We'd have a foundation model for a lot of the AI that is actually human authenticated and accountable, because members are the only ones that can put things on the record in Congress. So you might not agree with the member, but you know where it came from. And it's a method of disclosure and transparency that we've hardly begun to examine, where you can audit the supply chain of information in this massive data engine, which is the Congress, but also the first branch of government. How do we make it more discoverable and searchable? I love this part about, how do you create member curated, district generated public witness testimony? Community informed decision making is something Congress should already be doing. I mean, Congress went on Zoom during the pandemic and an emergency measure. And the preliminary research on that coming back was that diversity among witnesses went up 300%. This I heard at a conference in Chicago, a political science conference. But that is tremendous, and we should have done that a long time ago. All of a sudden, you could be sitting in your barn in Montana, you could be sitting on your boat off the coast of Florida, wherever you could get a signal, you could testify in front of Congress. Think about it. Right now, you have to pay your way. You have to spend a week writing testimony. You have to get a hotel. You have to get invited. So that is one of the things that I think is, again, is this aperture that we can, like, flood the zone with actual, authentic, public serving civic voice. So all this new data, AI, piloting new technologies, Congress also has to fund itself. Like in the continuing resolution that passed a couple weeks ago, I was really afraid to see that it wiped out its innovation fund. So all the money, or maybe it went down from 10 to 2 million, which isn't a lot of money for this kind of work. I don't know if it's going to be able to continue in the next year. If it is, it might be really pared down. So also making data accessible, accountable, and permanent. These are global standards for open government. We have to also try to make that the bottom line, is that it's accessible, which it isn't right now, accountable, which will require all kinds of new auditability and transparency mechanisms for policymaking, and permanent means that it needs to be stored and kept in a public serving space where it will be there forever. So, and those are big challenges. So I know we're seeing these challenges everywhere. So this is, like, to me, one of the saddest parts of fighting with Europe, because Europe is our partner on this. They are our allies. I mean, I think they understand that, like, we need a NATO for data right now, right? Like, with Putin in there messing around and doing ad buys and the kind of weaponization of information very purposefully. So go ahead. We can come back to that. What prompts Congress to reform itself? Like, you can read all of these things. It's jealous of the executive branch. That's why it created its own budget office. That's why it moves ahead. It's not like it's preventive and thoughtful. It does things a lot in response to public demanding openness and accountability. Increase capacity to address complex issues. This is where it's really fallen down over the last 30 years. It's still, like, I remember when I was working on Afghanistan, Iraq, the wars. I worked on a lot of the wars that we've been in. I remember thinking, like, the Armed Services Committee, like, it still sees the world like it's the 19th century. Like, it's always waiting for Napoleon to invade Prussia. It's not thinking about bin Laden. It's not thinking about climate change. It's not able to do that. And if you look at the Armed Services Plan, you see why. And does it even communicate with the sort of other AID, which just got destroyed and wiped out? Does it talk to the state? Are they able to fuse those and blend those issues when they're deliberating? No, not very well. Not unless the staff know each other, and not unless there's a way or a convening system where they're sharing information. So that's another thing that we could possibly do adjacent to Congress, or if it's not going to do it for itself. Efficiency and effectively, that is why the GOP loved the modernization stuff. It was much more, it wasn't so much a big democracy as, democracy issue is as effective, efficient constituent service, which is a fine way to look at it, and to respond to emergencies and security issues. And that's where I think we can take some comfort in that Congress really adapted during the pandemic. And that was almost a constitutional crisis, and we handled it. We're in another one now. We need to handle it. So we can talk about how we do that. So we're in an emergency now. And this is a chance for us to pick up all this underused and underutilized and ignored capacity of the most powerful legislature in the world and move it on out. So go ahead. So yeah, I mean, I always focus on the data because the mission, like I went to the Hill to try to replace and refurbish and renew sort of common shared knowledge, this public serving knowledge sharing. A lot of the information that Congress used to provide for itself has been privatized into to subscription services or become lobbying or because and when you doom and harm your public institutions, it makes sense then that the idea of public serving anything or the society deserving this, that also goes away, and so we have to rebuild that sense of collective decision making and a mission. So I go out to a lot of the events in DC. These pictures I took, QAnon standing in front of the National Archives. Like these ladies were darling. I talked to them for a while. They were really into cosplaying basically the QAnon stuff. Um, this is a crazy person's brain in front of the Capitol, and the conspiracy theories on this car were epic, like every single one you can imagine. I don't know if you could pull that car up to the Capitol today, but that was just in 2020 and during the Stop the Steal. And then InfoWars in front of the Lincoln Memorial, right? And this kind of real grievance laden, I call it the grievance grifting media industry. So yeah, those are pictures I've just taken wandering around DC over the last few years. Go ahead. So during the pandemic, we brought those of us working in the Fixed Congress cohort really put Congress online, working with members, doing the mock hearings, showing people like how would you even approximate a hearing given web conferencing. Congress had to pass emergency rules in May 2020 to get itself online and like proxy voting was another one, um, allowing members to go remote. Remember, I don't know if people are watching this, we were live on 9/11, but on 9/11 members were in DC and so they were able to work from Congress to respond. But during the pandemic everyone was disparate and all over the place, and so that was something Congress had never had to do before, but we did have the technology to be able to carry on with business. And so this I wrote a number of playbooks during the pandemic to help members reconnect to their communities. This is me doing a role playing and a mock hearing in some parking lot outside Dodge City, Kansas on my way home. I drove home. I'm from rural New Mexico. I went home during the pandemic to take care of my mother on her horse farm. She had dementia and we were trying to keep her at home. So I ended up working across the United States in parking lots on an iPad, but also from New Mexico for a good part of those 2 years. So go ahead. So the other thing that I've been sort of in rooting around in our foundational documents, it's been really interesting to me to look at the First Amendment responsibilities of Congress. One of them is the right to petition. It always kind of gets ignored and forgotten. That and the right to assemble, I think, are really important right now. The right to petition used to be a functional docket inside the House of Representatives and the clerk's office. Congress set its agenda by petitions for years. That's how women got the right to vote. That's how slavery finally ended, is that because so many people couldn't vote, Congress, in its wisdom, in its miraculous institutional capacity, created a side door in for everyone else. And these were petitions. And these petitions, they created a way for the disenfranchised to be able to be represented. And there's nothing new under the sun in Congress, is what I'm saying. Like it's this sort of creaky old jalopy, but it really can adapt. Nothing new under the sun. Like it has adapted, it has figured things out. It is a miraculous beast. And I like to tell people that it has an incredible memory of other adaptations inside of it. So in the 40s, Congress offshored a lot of those grievance processing mechanisms into agencies like Social Security, veterans. And so what it gave up under the guise of efficiency was it gave up its barometer of the American people, and it doesn't have a standardized grievance processing system anymore. And when you understand this, you can see why grievance processing became privatized through social media and has been an utter disaster for democracy. Part of it's because Congress was supposed to be doing this, and it really never figured out a modern version of it since the 40s. So it's before most of us were born. Go ahead. This article is available right now if you want to read it. So this is the right to petition is in the First Amendment. This is how Congress set its agenda. Just think about it. The third Congress had over 350 select committees. That's because a petition would start, and then they'd create a committee to deal with the petition. And then, it either became law, and this is like it got considered. There was a huge deliberative process. Like, to me, this is the original algorithm, right? Is the process of Congress. It has this really intricate way of, it's like that cartoon, Schoolhouse Rock, the bill's kind of bedraggled at the end, but that's because it's been shaped and talked and tossed about and sent back, and then it's a law. But we really have to figure out how to figure that out in a modern way. And this is sort of the old way it was done is through petition. So just know that this has existed in its bone structure, and we can bring it back. Go ahead. So these are some. So one of the things that we did over the last couple of years is look at ways that we could optimize staff time using AI inside the institution without endangering the data of people's personal information um, or letting it get out of control. So Congress is quite conservative in its use of AI, but here are just some examples. I mean, anybody who's using any of the AI engines out there can attest that it just saves a tremendous amount of time. And if we can harness it for public good and make sure that it's being used and the data is being used responsibly, I think it can transform democracy to do what I'm talking about and to scale. But for that, we need to have a public interest version of it that doesn't become a commercial model and that's not for sale. And that we just have to stand up for that right now. It's shocking to me that Doge and them can beat up on any concept of public good as if the United States could exist in any other context. They don't know what they're talking about. So these are just examples, bill ideas, strategy ideas, memos, all kinds of stuff, very useful. And Congress did get a bunch of beta licenses to allow staff to experiment. And can you imagine if you've got 25-year-old staff, they're all using this already. And so I think Congress finally figured out, like, let's get in front of this train and make it possible. One of the things I've been working on is figuring out how do we let deliberative technologies be allowed to compete with the commercial vendors. We need B corporations and nonprofit technologies to be in the pool. I think that's how we start creating a far more public serving model of technology and AI. Go ahead. So one thing that I really love the idea of is how do we create a congressional record full of civic voice? This isn't impossible. People on this call probably use Otter or Fathom or these voice into data recording. Then there's really some tremendous experimentation going on out there where you can have public meetings and record them and then turn them into beautiful analytics. You can use maps and show where the voice came from. Like, to figure out how these technologies can improve the political currency of time and place, meaning that one of the things I think we can do if we don't get a reversal from Citizens United and get money out of politics is we have to actually shift the currency of power. And if you can't show up with money, you got to show up with people. And that's how our democracy works. And the money has just had a huge advantage and it's destroying us from within right now. Is purchased access to power is destroying us. And even if it's not intentional, it's sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So how do we show up with people far more effectively? And that, I think, is we're just starting to explore. If Congress has got this sort of disruptive technology in it, how do we show up more to prioritize things like community informed decision making? Member curated, district generated public witness testimony. I'm working on a playbook right now to rebuild field hearings and move them out of DC and into states. And that's a more institutionally adjacent method of pushing back and building opposition power. It's not protest. Town halls are great, and then we're seeing a lot of them. There's still kind of an open mic aspect to them. I think field hearings is where the real interesting adjacent power might be. So I'm working on that right now. I can, in about a month, talk more about it if I can get it off the ground. So it incentivizes showing up in person, although you can create hybrid models. You can structure data for the purposes of lawmaking, which is really important in the wake of the Supreme Court decisions last summer. Chevron was a Supreme Court decision that eliminated the ability of the federal agencies to interpret law when it's ambiguous, which means we are going to have to rely on Congress writing far more precise law, and also uh, use statutory interpretation, meaning its record is going to become even more important. So let's get involved in building that record. Let's make sure that we don't leave everyone out of it this time around. So go ahead, structuring data. So this is something I love, is like I love maps. And I wrote a piece for the Atlantic a few years ago, and I asked a friend to build me a map of the Constitution Subcommittee and the Judiciary Committee. This, I think, is the full committee, but it was really interesting. And the red dots were 3 recent mass shootings. And I just remember thinking the way we can start showing people when their issue is far more important and where, like on these, when it came to gun violence prevention, like where I'm from in New Mexico, doesn't even have a voice in the conversation for a while. Like it can vote, the members will vote on it, but it's not on any of the committees that have power to initiate. Montana, I mean, look at all these places that don't have a voice until it becomes much more a piece of law that everybody can work on. So I hope this makes sense to you, but I feel like mapping when and where an issue is really important. That's something that we should be able to do with maps right now. This is old and clunky. I mean, this is a 7 or 8-year-old article now. But mapping, I think, geographically, where something's time is more, the timing in the legislative process is vital and important. This is the kind of tool that we need. Go ahead. Okay, this is another project that I worked on called the Afghanistan Congressional Communications Hub. I worked on this with some Brits and some other folks who had just come back from being deployed to Afghanistan. And what we realized at that time was that, so I was getting calls from like armed services staff asking me about girls' education, because that was one of the metrics for American involvement in Afghanistan. And I remember thinking, oh my God, like we're going to militarize this whole thing unless people understand that this is a civil military challenge, and that what we're trying to do there is build social cohesion. So I worked on this Afghanistan hub, which was a rapid response policy one page. Actually, I still have this domain name and I have it up if anybody wants to look at something else that could be created as a bespoke information support system for an issue or a committee. It was completely transparent. It was very well researched. They knew me. And I went around town and pitched it to people to help me set it up. And it went, this was it, it went viral in 3 weeks. Like this was everybody who was using it in a few weeks, because there wasn't anybody talking about the civil military piece of Afghanistan. They were either looking at it as a military thing, because you did have the army doing, and the National Guard especially, doing everything from banking to garbage pickup. And then you also had like the Marines and others doing the sort of kinetic or the pointy end of the spear. But the helping people sort it out in a centralized place was really valuable. And again, if you want to look at this, you can go look at it. It's called New Strategic Security Initiative. It's still up. I still keep the domain name up as a model. If you want to look at it, you can figure out how to, almost any issue would really love this kind of bipartisan, really solid, robust research that's out there, and also tailored for the use of Congress. So it's not just any information. This was tailored for Congress, for armed services and foreign relations. Go ahead. So the shape, structure, share playbooks that I wrote over the last 4-5 years are really ways to get the community far more involved in lawmaking. Developing data is one way to do it. We talked a little bit about that. Shape, structure, share is the curriculum that I wrote. Shaping is what the public and citizens and residents can do, shape priorities at the formative level. Members structure the information. They structure it for their workplace. They structure it for how they need it in the lawmaking process. The institution is the one that shares. Again, Congress is one of the biggest publishing entities in the world. It should be sharing stuff all over the place that's used as a public accountable repository of information. This one in the middle, Raul Grijalva, who just died a couple weeks ago, sadly, he was, in his mid 70s when he became an early adopter in Congress and did one of the first actually the first collaboratively edited bill on a platform called Madison. So the environmental justice community wrote the bill with him across the country, and this model is out there. And so I wrote a playbook on how they did it. The other one was building apps for Congress. Like, how do you do it with members of Congress to help create that efficiency and also learn about things like maker spaces and the public good technologists who are out there and really all just chomping at the bit to help, but they don't really know how to connect to the institution. This was with Code for America in Boston. Go ahead. And then I think we can't talk about going forward until we somehow rebuild public trust. And you know, the big trust is just in institutions is really plummeted over the last. It's plummeted actually to a quite dangerous level, where you have a lot of Americans thinking violence is an appropriate response to politics somehow. I mean, I saw that with January 6th. And, you know, they were a lot of those people were completely bamboozled and brainwashed. I agree, but like some of them were really sinister and had very bad, dire plans. But I think, and again, I live and my family's in a very right wing part of the United States, and I go home and I grew up in real sort of red, blue, whatever, just you know, getting along. But I was really shocked at how radicalized against government people were when I went home for the pandemic. Rural America, oil and gas community in transition, losing its economic security, but also just how people were radicalized against any concept of a shared future. And that's what we can start working on. So these are just examples of things that we can really stand behind, experiment with, bring together, make more visible, build solidarity. These are examples. I'm sure there's examples from where you live as well. Go ahead. So yeah, I mean, the big question for us all is how might new data tools like AI, how do we build a resilient and legitimate institutions? How do we rebuild and renew them? I know they're not going to look the same, especially after what's going on right now. But how do we get back to this idea that the that we have a multiracial democracy? It's the importance of the United States in the world is just tremendous, you know, and for us to fail to live up to all those dreams and ideals and support system and shared knowledge and research and development, it's not just bringing us down, and it's really going to harm the planet in a profound way. I took these two pictures. One is from Farmington, New Mexico, where I went to high school. This is in the middle of the pandemic, and it's got every single QAnon conspiracy and protest that you can imagine. This was what the internet looked like. This was our major, like an information system. I didn't realize it till I went and lived in a community where I would hear these conspiracies at the hardware store, and I went to high school with them, and I was like, "What?" So that we have to get back to creating honest, nonprofit, local information sharing where we shape the collectively understood facts. And here's Congress, bless it, after January 6th, you know, blocked off to the world. You know, if we don't rebuild and redevelop our capacity for having deliberative, shared, community informed democracy with our Constitution intact, including the right to petition, that's what it looks like. I don't know if that's the last, is that the last slide? Is that the last one? I think it is. But I'm done if anybody wants
Great.
to ask questions. I think that
Thank
was
you, Lorelei.
sure.
I appreciate your perspective of, you know, what Congress was, what it is now, and what it could be. I've got one thing I'd like to flag for all the advocates, particularly in communications on the call. I really appreciate what we call social math when you talk about the price of Hamilton tickets and how in one year we spent collectively 5 times more on Hamilton tickets than congressional technology. So
I think it was a cumulative percent more.
cumulative. Oh, so not just in that year.
It
Okay.
wasn't just that year. That would be really bad. The point I was
Amazing.
trying to make is like we're happy to spend money singing and dancing about democracy, but we really, as a people, haven't done the work. And it's a two-way street. Like, right,
Yeah.
Congress can do a lot, but one of the reasons members are so inert and supine right now, especially on the Democratic side, one on the Republican side, they purged a lot of the centrists and the moderates, or they're afraid to do anything, or they're enthralled to this administration. But on the Democrats just don't have a support system like they need, and that's on all of us, right? You can't just do it with consultants and polling. You have to show up and do the work. And I
Yeah.
think that a lot of people would tell you, we just have not done that and my whole life working in and out of DC, we haven't done that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of folks who are recognizing now. One of my favorite expressions is that citizening is a verb. To be a citizen is to be active in that. And there have been many years we felt like we could let democracy look after itself, and now we're recognizing that's not the case. I'm reminded too of something in law called the CIA effect, where because of the way that government and all different agencies are portrayed, specifically by Hollywood, and a general perception that everything is the latest and greatest with technology, you have a lot of juries who assume that there's just this omniscience of knowing and everything. And there have been many juries and many court trials that have been impacted by that assumption. People can use that, defendants in particular, for their benefit. And I'm struck by how, again, portrayals by Hollywood, I think a lot of folks probably assume that everybody in the government has the latest and greatest in technology, and it's not the case. And I appreciate your example of, we need as citizens to be able to connect with the people who are elected to represent us from a horse farm in New Mexico, and still have our voices be heard. And so I'm curious, with all the misconceptions, and we talked about a lot, but are there other misconceptions about Congress and technology that you want to correct?
I think the most important thing is also there's no unified system, and the other thing is that the biggest tragedy to me, working on this, is the privatization of the memory of democracy.
Mm,
Is that since I've been working on the Hill, it used to be provided publicly, it was shared, it was accessible to the outside world, like the caucus system, which is right underneath the committees. It was bipartisan. It had staff. They would create these fabulous, up to the minute documents on arms control treaties, on climate, on hunger in Africa, these kinds of things. That is no longer exists, or it's been fragmented into scrappy little NGOs who can't possibly create a common system. Congress needs to be the center node of this. And a lot of that information has again been privatized, like a Bloomberg terminal or fiscal node or a quorum. These services are brilliant, but if you have $27,000, you're going to spend it on a district staffer. You're not going to spend it on a terminal or a whole bunch of subscriptions. I don't know if you saw, like a couple of weeks ago, Politico got accused of uh, being sort of a propaganda rag inside Congress. I mean, it was just an example to me, like the stuff that Politico charges for and its special select, high membership used to
mhm.
be stuff that Congress did for itself. And now lobbyists know what's going on before staff do. Like,
Yeah.
that's no way to run a democracy. We should have never let this happen. And you have to, like, people need to know that members need to stand up for their institution. And just people, we don't have the muscles built up for doing that. But I think civil society and the population needs to rise up and show them the way. And that's what I mean. We need to move beyond just resistance and protest and into building resilience. And we do that through the institution itself.
We have a few questions coming in, and if folks have others, you're welcome to put them, seeing some in the chat as well as the Q&A. If we can, it might be helpful to bring the map back up if we can. We had a question about the map that you showed, and whether the green spaces, did that represent the areas that the Judiciary Committee bills impacted, or was that the
Oh, I'm
members
sorry, I didn't
they
explain that. That was
represent?
the districts. Those were the districts of the members on the committee.
Got it. Got it.
Those
Okay.
so that issue was much more important at that time in those districts.
Got it. And Alyssa, let us know if that answers your question. Happy to dig into that more. We have another question about noting, no matter what we think, at most of the time, 1/3 of Americans agree to anything, 1/3 disagree. And then the question is, how do we get the remaining third to care, connect? Technology doesn't address that. I think that you started to touch on this with the notion of trust, but how do we get more folks to tune in and see what's happening and what needs to happen?
Well, I think that there's still a lot of I think that our job right now as people who care about the future of democracy is we need to make these drastic bludgeon tactics really obvious at the local level. Like there used to be something on the Hill called the Office of Technology Assessment. It was 120 staff that did forecasting with Congress on bills, usually like what's the impact of this in the future. It was eliminated very specifically so Congress would be sort of blind and deaf and mute on its ability to see the future and develop situational awareness about implications of law. Um, so it's very hard right now to get what's called district level data. It's starting, like census has some. There's some really interesting subscriptions coming out, which now these it's called shape files, where people are able to show exactly what does this mean. Like during the Obama administration, I remember once on the healthcare bill, the White House did all the research for all the districts, and so they could be like, use these talking points when you go home in like a recess package. It's like homework for members during recess in their district during work periods while they're home, and then they could talk very specifically about what this means for you retirees, for you school children, for you people who are on Medicaid. Like we need to flood the zone with that kind of information. And it's not easy, but like to me, like if you mix that with these maps and make it real time so it changes, I know that's an expensive thing to build, but I think the data is available now.
Mhm.
Narrowcasting, so there's broadcasting and then there's narrowcasting.
Mhm.
Narrowcasting by districts is really, really important. So they have exactly who's winning and losing on these bludgeon tactics, this sort of constitutional crisis. It's benefiting someone, but it's definitely not the vast majority of us.
Yeah, and I think it's asking a lot of folks. I mean, as you've mentioned, that there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of information. Sometimes it's really hard to find. And so in 2025, we've got the technology to put it at people's fingertips, but it's not in use. And so it seems like, and I'm appreciating that this question from Peter, how to get people, even if we get people involved and actively wanting to citizen, then there's a lot of steps. It's not just the push of a button yet to be able to get all the information that we need. We've got
Yeah.
another question about tackling misinformation and distrust. We're actually going to have an entire webinar about that later this year, but curious if you have thoughts on that. And she notes that the conspiracy theories you showed are absurd. How do we reach folks who are believing things that simply not just aren't true, but are really damaging?
Well, I mean, I'm just starting with my own family. It's, uh, I always start like my pivot when I was home was to start talking about dogs. And like what you want to do is you not try to take something head on. You just want to shift the prioritization of a disagreement. And there's some really interesting brain science on this that I don't have it handy, but I will find for you. Um, One of the things to keep in mind is that the human brain processes loss at like 5 times the rate of gain. So that it takes like 5 positive joy cards being dealt for every loss card. And
Mm,
that's a really hard thing to overcome, especially when you have this manufactured fear and threat environment. So I really feel like one of the ways to do this is, at home, like I have like when I'm home in New Mexico and hanging out with people I know there, I only talk about 60% of the stuff that I want to talk about. Or I change the subject, or I like try to point out very directly who this is hurting. And even then, some people will like I'll tell them that these amazing people who are doing this great work for children just all lost their jobs and what this means for us. And like to make the future far, far more relevant in the present, I think is one of the only ways we can fight this is to make the trade-offs really visible without shaming. Like shaming is not a persuasion tactic. And I feel like a lot of the pushback on MAGA has been shaming. And it's not gonna work. And they double down and it's wrong and it's unkind. Like I'm really, really mad at my friends who voted for this. But still, I know at the same time, I need to go back to them at some point with an open heart and a hand held out when they're really hurting, because they will be, and
yeah.
say, gosh, we've got to create a way to bring people back to the table who are ashamed of what's happening right now. And we're not a mature democracy in that way, right? Like we haven't had this sort of mass like white liberals haven't anyway. It's not like a lot of Americans, certainly Black Americans, have lived with fear and threats their entire life. So the difference now is that it's pervasive, and any of us who care about liberal democracy and a shared future are at risk and threatened. So that is something I'm working on every day too. And I want to attend your session because I'm so mad right now. I'm finding it hard, but I do know that there's certain things that everybody has to do, like at the county level, and it's got to do with sort of, I call it dogs, dumps, and democracy. Like we're all at the dump together, we're all at the pound together, and you could add deeds in the DMV. So these are things that it's the 5 Ds of how we save democracies. You launder democracy through dumps, deeds, driving, and dogs.
So funny, all the local things that are really focusing us. I'll say what brings me a lot of hope is working with Braver Angels and seeing folks at the local level who are working across many different divides and getting things done, because we still need that. For all we're arguing about, at the national and global levels, even, like, we do still need deeds. We still do need things to get to the dump and all the rest. So I know
Well,
we're going.
libraries are going to get wiped out by the last week's executive order. So I would say pay very close attention of everything. Get on one of the lists that shows you everything that's happening, and start making that very relevant at the local level. Because even if it's a real conservative town who doesn't care about the government or hates blue cities or whatever, we are all so interdependent. We all depend on each other. And making that obvious in a loving way, I think, is going to be far more effective, even though it's hard and I'm having a hard time with it too.
Yeah, I know we're going over time just a bit, but this feels really important. You mentioned lists that list all the things that are happening. Do you have suggestions for folks? And this is something we can also include in the resources.
Yeah, how about if I send them to you? I know that like Economic Policy Institute, what something did federal jobs lost in
Mhm.
every district. There's some stories that are being collected in every district. But again, there's something, if you have data tech nerds in your life, there's something called a shape file. That's a district shape file. You can get it at census.gov. They have a Congress section now. And it's that kind of stuff that will be very effective working with a member of Congress, is like, oh my gosh, make the connections visible, what we're going to lose, even what we potentially might lose. Things, again, like we haven't had the conversation, I think, in the United States is, what is government even for, right? That's why like Elon Musk and then can drive a Mack truck through these poor old agencies and who are doing wonderful work invisibly, how much they hold us together. I think that their end game is very sinister. But I do think that this radicalization against government's been going on for a long time. And it's because we don't talk about it enough and give
Mhm.
credit where credit's due, and like understand that these are our taxpayer dollars. And we need to get way better at all of that.
Yeah, I think a lot that's been invisible is now becoming visible, but unfortunately, while a lot of it is being broken. And so the good news, I think a lot more folks are paying attention. I think where we talk about I completely agree with you, like shame is not helpful, even as we're really angry and see folks who didn't recognize all that could happen potentially, or all that whatever's in the past. What we're seeing now is a lot of folks, rather than being told, we understand you have problems, we understand you're hurting, are being told you are the problem. And that's not welcome for anybody. So we can dig more into that for sure. I want one final question, if I can squeeze it in, and thanks to folks who are staying over the hour. We've covered so much, Lorelei. If there's one thing you want people to remember, what is that thing?
I would say don't give up on these institutions. We can renew them. The heavy lifting has been done in Congress with, I mean, it has asked for this reformation. We just don't know about it yet, and we haven't built the tools to take advantage of it and to improve the practice of democracy with these new spaces that the institution, in a completely bipartisan way, has created for us. That's my advice: is like, don't give up on these institutions, grab them, protect them. Constitution, I know it's not perfect. I know the era that it was built in, uh, not great for a lot of people, but they are able to adapt and change, and we need to be swinging for the fences to protect them right now.
Mm. I really appreciate that note of hope, and I'm actually picturing like that swinging for the fences, like really putting our efforts in, and it's going to take all of us. So thank you. Thank you for joining today. Everyone, this is an ongoing series. Next month, we'll be joined with by Dr. Allison K. Ralph to talk about belonging in a fragmented world. And she has a really fascinating take on the notion of shared values and beliefs. You will not want to miss that one. So we'll put that link in to the chat to register. When you leave the webinar today, a quick poll will pop up. Please be a helper. Give us 15 seconds to let us know what you thought of today's webinar. If you've got other questions, we really value your input. For now, be well, do good, stay healthy and hopeful. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you soon. Thank you again, Lorelei. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.